Okay, Hito has very kindly agreed to sit on stage with me and keep me company while I talk about her work and a little bit about my own work, and then we'll move on and have some questions at the end. Okay. It is almost impossible to talk about Hito, because everything you might want to say about her work, she has already said it better. When one of my students writes about Hito, whether it be her films or essays, my heart is gladdened, as it is impossible to write boringly about them, unlike the many theorists who pursue what we could call the didactic moralism of the concept. Hito's work is deft, clever, and witty. To mention just some of her extraordinary concepts, we have the idea of the poor image from 2009. I quote, "The poor image is a copy in motion. Its quality is bad, its resolution substandard. As it accelerates, it deteriorates. It is a ghost of an image, a preview, a thumbnail, an errant idea, an itinerant image distributed for free, squeezed through slow digital connections, compressed, reproduced, ripped, remixed, as well as copied and pasted into other channels of distribution. The poor image is a rag or a rip, an AVI or a JPEG, a lumpen proletarian in the class society of appearances, ranked and valued according to its resolution." We have the concept of the spam of the earth from 2012. Image spam is one of the many dark matters of the digital world. Spam tries to avoid detection by filters by presenting its message as an image file. An inordinate amount of these images floats around the globe, desperately vying for human attention. They advertise pharmaceuticals, replica items, body enhancements, penny stocks, and degrees. According to the pictures dispersed via image spam, humanity consists of scantily dressed degree holders with jolly smiles, enhanced by orthodontic braces. We have the idea of art as occupation from 2011. What used to materialize exclusively as object or product, as artwork, now tends to appear as activity or performance. These can be endless, as strained budgets and attention spans will allow. Today, the traditional work of art has been largely supplemented by art as a process, as an occupation. We have her discussion of things, of what it might mean to reverse the age-old opposition between subject and object. But as the struggle to become a subject became mired in its own contradictions, a different possibility emerged. How about siding with the object for a change? Why not affirm it? Why not be a thing? An object without a subject, a thing among other things. A thing is usually not a shiny new Boeing taking off on its virgin flight. Rather, it might be its wreck, painstakingly pieced together from scrap inside a hangar after its unexpected nosedive into catastrophe. A thing is the ruin of a house in Gaza, a film reel lost or destroyed in civil war, a female body tied up with ropes, fixed in obscene positions. Things condense power and violence. Just as a thing accumulates productive forces and desires, so does it also accumulate destruction and decay. As artist and writer Linda Stupart, hi Linda, puts it, knowledge as participation in the object undoes the alienation that is the base principle of language, and especially of art, culture, and assumed cultural understanding. The simultaneous distancing, acknowledgement, and naming of the immediate expression, the gasp, the cry, the apprehension that precedes judgment. We also have images as material objects, ideas as images. In November, after the collapse of a certain kind of politics, the weapons remain. The former socialist armies are dismantled, but not their weapons, says one of the intertitles. Here and elsewhere, as the slogan of an earlier model of political documentary making has been replaced by a subtly different one, a global movement of ideas and weapons that at the same time renders certain struggles unrepresented and unrecognized. The pedagogical internationalism that Andrea describes, and together with other comrades who investigated those processes around the world that one could take part in to learn something, as Hito says, at the moment it seems impossible to universalize this kind of icon. What we have instead is perhaps the generic icon, such as Time's Person of the Year. In 2011, this was the protester. November is when the former heroes are madmen. November is when Andrea is killed. The untrustworthy nature of the political documentary maker. How can we trust this film? There's a kind of pall of distrust that hangs over this film and renders it even more interesting. One of the voices says, "Weapons are not accessories like a film camera. And we're left with the idea, as she says, that it is only in fiction that the good ultimately prevails. There is an asymmetry between the idea of using one's hands as a filmmaker, as a martial artist, and using the weapons of war. In Adorno's Grey, we have the anonymous protester describing his role in Book Block. We confront the police with books. In this way, we've come full circle from November to the use of negative dialectics as a defensive weapon that is also not a weapon. As the protester says, it is quite effective because it does not look aggressive. It is just a book, after all. The police would hit the book quite a bit, but they did not understand its function at all. We were talking last night about this talk, and we came up with a phrase, "It's never over," to describe the afterlife of events, of lives, of Hito's relation to Andrea, of the aftermath of the student protests of 2010. Having lived through the 9th of December 2010 1,000 times through the footage and in the trials, the afterlife of the images, of the material force of images, is very real indeed. As a result of the stress created by the trials, my pupils are now permanently slightly different sizes. I've become a kind of broken camera. In an interview, Hito was asked, what should stay the same? And she replied, free education, wherever it exists. One of the things I admire most about Hito's work is what we could call her radical political honesty. No one gets a free pass. We are all absolutely enmeshed and entangled in the detritus of capitalism and the reality of the art world. As she puts it, amongst all other forms of art, fine art has been mostly closely linked to post-forwardist speculation with bling, boom and bust. Contemporary art is no unworldly discipline nestled away in some remote ivory tower. On the contrary, it is squarely placed in the neoliberal thick of things. We cannot dissociate the hype around contemporary art from the shock policies used to defibrillate slowing economies. Such hype embodies the effective dimension of global economies, tied to Ponzi schemes, credit addiction, and bygone bull markets. Contemporary art is a brand name without a brand, ready to be slapped onto almost anything. A quick facelift touting the new creative imperative for places in need of an extreme makeover. The suspense of gambling combined with the stern pleasures of upper-class boarding school education. A licensed playground for a world confused and collapsed by dizzying deregulation. If contemporary art is the answer, the question is, how can capitalism be made more beautiful? The second thing I really like about Hito's work is the way in which she draws attention to the voices of those she records, whether it's her own voice or the voices of Philosopher 1 and 2 in Adorno's Grey. These are extremely fragile, awkward voices, their supposed institutional authority undermined by the many pauses, ungainly phrases, and in my case, an undercurrent of giggles that I just can't stop as I discuss the meaning of the political breast. While Hito's work is above all honest, continually drawing attention to its own construction and framing, Hito is very adept at getting her subjects to do exactly what she wants. The recording of my voice in Adorno's Grey was to some extent an act of trickery on Hito's part. Having invited me to her hotel room, and after a glass of wine, we talked about what I might say for the film. Of course, this is what you hear in the film. In a discussion we had a few years ago, me and Hito and several other people, about the term superhybridity. I don't know why we were talking about this term. I was correctly taken to task by Hito. I grumpily argued as a kind of modernist. I wrote this. Terms like superhybridity are disturbing to me because they have their own PR machine. Who can deny that superhybridity and transdisciplinarity sound sexy, exciting, cool? The language of financialization of which the art world became highly involved in the past few decades has led to a seemingly endless proliferation of empty but libidinally charged words, a theory babble that keeps the market moving, a kind of amniotic soup in which networks are formed and money shuffle around. The problem with the neo-romantic vision of a hybrid world is that it offers no understanding of real networks of exploitation and exclusion, of accumulation by dispossession, as David Harvey puts it. Filmmakers and artists who attempt to cognitively map the actual material processes of distribution, exploitation, employment, Alan Sekula, for example, and attempt internal critiques of the aesthetic genres they use, Hito's own work, on documentary form in November, for example, seem much more relevant than work that Magpie-like simply wants to reassemble bright, shiny things from all over the place without paying attention to the routes by which ideas and objects arrive at your feet. Hito's response, I don't mind shiny new things. As soon as they crash into something else, they end up looking pretty enough. And I adore sexy and exciting vocabulary. Libidinally charged conversations, can't get enough of them. A little more sex, a little less biology, please. And nothing cool, that would be just awful. In her 2009 essay, Is the Museum a Factory?, Hito writes, as a multitude, the public operates under the condition of partial invisibility, incomplete access, fragmented realities, of commodification within clandestinity. Transparency, overview, and the sovereign gaze cloud over to become opaque. Okay, and Hito wanted me to talk a little bit about my own work, even though I suggested I should really talk about hers because that's what everyone is here for. Nevertheless, I will talk a little bit about some work I'm doing, if there's time, which is around this concept of the public, which relates to Hito's quote. But I think I need some water first. Yes, my glamorous assistant will pour me some water. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is from some recent work that I've been doing that relates to this issue of the public, in particular thinking about protest and crowds. It's called The Only Good Public is a Moving Public. Who is this public? The one that silently demands public art, who mutely requests public order, who endlessly opines in the narrow voice of right-wing newspapers expressing some kind of locationless public opinion. And who is the other public? The public that desires and increasingly occupies space, the public that wants, expects and needs to be cared for in times of crisis, the public that believes in and aspires to the good, but is never permitted to be the good public. The first public is mute, but constantly chattering. The second public alive, but constantly silenced. With the ongoing and perhaps almost complete destruction of the public sphere in the name of privatization, individualism and competition, we are at the same time confronted with the necessary ghost of the acceptable public, the one invoked by the state in the name of the preservation of order. This is the mute, static public used against the mobile, protesting public. The punishment of those involved in defending public services against austerity measures are punished precisely in the name of this other public, like two sides in a war where each participant perversely takes the same name. One of these publics is apparently unified in their outrage, right-thinking and eternal. The other is messy, unpredictable and prone to insurrection. One public must constantly be invoked to beat the other, yet the one that usually wins is a phantom, and the one that loses, a reality obscured. But who exactly, from the standpoint of the state, is the good public? This is the public on whose behalf the courts and the judiciary are endlessly aggrieved. In the appeals following long prison sentences for crimes committed during the English riots of August 2011, Lord Judge is his real name, the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, made very clear the separation between an always already shocked public and a shocking mobile public. He said, "There can be very few decent members of our community who are unaware of and were not horrified by the rioting which took place all over the country between the 6th of August and the 11th of August 2011. The public of this community, terrified by the, quote, the ghastliness inflicted by the lawlessness of this month, are aghast. Etymologically speaking, they have seen a ghost. But because the world is the wrong way up, they fail to realise that they are the ghost, and that the judges are speaking on behalf of someone that does not exist. We are not even confronted with Deleuze's claim regarding the indignity of speaking for others, but of the far stranger idea of, from the legal standpoint, the necessity of speaking for non-existent others. The law must punish on behalf of mythical offended others, because to punish for its own sake would be to scandalously admit that this is in fact its entire reason for existing. The law constantly reinforces its own identity by segregating members of the public who are no longer included in the name of a public that doesn't exist. Listen to the judge in the riots appeal again. There is an overwhelming obligation on sentencing courts to do what they can to ensure the protection of the public, whether in their homes or in their businesses or in the street, and to protect the homes and businesses and the streets in which they live and work. This is an imperative. The obligation overwhelms. The best the courts can do is to deter through the excessive punishment of individuals stripped out of their collective setting, but punished on behalf of the mob, the rabble, the crowd. This is an imperative. The imperative that announces itself in the form of an imperative. The law is the law. This public is the public of property, of course, homes, businesses, and although they do not own the streets, they are permitted by the good God of the public overseer to live and work in them. The ghost public of the protester rioter is nevertheless capable of, quote, causing injury and damage and fear to even the most stout-hearted of citizens, where stout conjures images of thick beer, roundedness and courage, yet it is afraid, always afraid, of the shattering of the thin glass of public peace. Listen to the voice of another judge in 1970, where a student protest at Cambridge University was deemed to have become a riot. When there is wanton and vicious violence of gross degree, the court is not concerned with whether it originates from gang rivalry or from political motives. It is the degree of mob violence that matters, and the extent to which the public peace is broken. Any participation whatever, irrespective of its precise form, in an unlawful or riotous assembly of this type, derives its gravity from becoming one of those who by weight of numbers pursued a common and unlawful purpose. The law of this country has always lent heavily against those who, to attain such a purpose, use the threat that lies in the power of numbers. But sometimes the law forgets itself, and forgets where it usually carves up the public, the legal person, and the law itself. 145 protesters who sat down in a London shop to protest the fact that its owners avoided paying tax were arrested, stripped, given white outfits, and redistributed across the city. They were given a date to appear in court. Yet, as 145 separate individuals, how could they possibly all fit into the dock, designed perhaps for a maximum of 10? They couldn't, of course. And the law had forgotten that it cannot, according to its own rules, punish groups as groups, but only as individuals belonging to those groups. The arithmetic of the law had forgotten to show its working out. The law would, of course, like to directly punish the bad public, the moving public, the public that self-organises and uses public space in a way that it is faithful to the original meaning of the word, pertaining to the people, rather than as scared individuals scurrying alone through regimes of private property, businesses, homes, the surveilled streets. But in order to defend property, the law must invent and stick by the individual. The one encounter must be punished on behalf of the bad public, all the while invoking the only collective subject it can tolerate and requires, the good public, the community. The law makes a revealing mistake when it forgets to punish individuals as representatives of groups and goes directly for the group itself. When several people alleged to have committed a serious public order offence are up in court together, for example during the miners' strikes in the 1980s, they are often acquitted, according to one barrister, because the jury falls in love with their solidarity, their collectivity. So the courts shift back to punishing in single file before shoving numbers into overcrowded jail cells, where stepping out of line or organising is swiftly curtailed by prison guards and endless transfers to other prisons. But what does all this legal stuff mean for art? For an art that strives to be public, that feels some connection to the public, as that which it wants to touch, interrogate, question, or be questioned by. What does this mean for an art that desires or depends upon the public purse? The silent ghost public perhaps deserves some of the public art put up in its name, as that which is loved by no one, literally. But the other public, the mobile, punished public, creates something else, not public art, but a collective blurring of the boundary between the public and art itself, in which the crowd creates a mobile image of another world, beyond legal persons and their punishment. Against the legal artist subject, we can oppose the illegal artist collective, the not whole whose mobility cracks open the real illusion of the good public, which exists nowhere, and to which no one belongs, yet whose spectre hovers over every arrest, trial and prison in the land. Okay. Okay, now I have to switch roles again and be an interviewer. Okay, I'm just going to... What's the time?
But let me respond to what you said,
What?
Nina.
Oh, yes, you can respond. Go on.
Yeah, let me just briefly respond, or try to respond, right? I was really fascinated by your description of the fracturing of the public into these two figures, no? The shocked public on the one hand, the good public, and the shocking public on the other hand, the people that get called, I don't know, hooligans, for example, as in Bosnia in the last few weeks. I mean, all these things are basically repeating worldwide in different forms and variations, these fracturing of these two forms of public. And actually, it made me think of something which I experienced during the screening, which is a fracturing of time, which seems to run somehow in parallel to that. I don't think you could like neatly map it onto that, but the thing that really intrigued me when I saw my own films after quite quite a while in the case of November was a complete fracturing of time. On the one hand, I made November 10 years ago, and everyone told me at that time that it was so pessimistic, to declare that October was over and what are we going to do now? Are we stuck with winter or what? And how can you do this to us? And I kept saying, listen, cheer up. If it's November now, it means it will be March in a while, no? And now it's well, that was 10 years ago, and it seemed we didn't get any further, right? I mean, we're still in November, and people have really tried to force spring to come everywhere, worldwide, and still it seems as if we're making no progress, and spring still hasn't come. It's still winter. And I mean, the ending of Adorno's Grey, which refers to the events taking place here in 2011, I think, after that there was probably an equal period of November and freeze and stasis, no? The inability of time to move on. There was no movement, no moving image, no moving public, if you like, or the moving public is frozen or detained even, put into jail. Quite literally. And on the other hand, so this is one aspect of time which I saw, which was very obvious to me in the screening. But on the other hand, watching November seemed like a film from the Stone Age to me, really, because all of the media I use do not exist anymore. There's no more SD video. I mean, no one is shooting in 4:3 ratio anymore. It's just not. It's not a standard. You have to try hard in order to do it. All these VHS cassettes, which you see and which were still in use at that time, none of this exists. And also the filmic language and all of that feels like prehistorical, no? Paleontological. It's very, very difficult for me to relate to it, even though, I mean, I know how it came about and everything. I remember the media context in which it was made, but let's say, I wouldn't call it technological progress, the developments that happened since show that in parallel to this tremendous historical freeze and stasis, there was such an acceleration and rush and even frenzy of replacement of ever new technological standards, creation of new platforms, and so on and so on, and also an acceleration of time within filmic representation. I mean, this is a film or a video which is very, very generous with time, right? And nothing loops in there. I don't know how that worked, to be honest. So the fracturing of time into accelerated, like micro loops, is going on at the same time as this total historical stasis. On the other hand, this is what I really felt during the screening, and it seemed to me as if one could map, these two different types of time which are going on onto your two ideas of the public, the moving public on the one hand, but also the good ideal ego public on the other hand.
Yeah, no, I think that's really right. um, I mean, it's kind of depressing when you have like the law controlling time, So when after protests or after the riots, the time becomes the time of law. They can decide how long you have to wait for a trial. They can decide, to basically kind of put your life on hold or destroy your life. They can make this period. They can stretch it infinitely. At the same time, they can also control very speeded up time. I mean, in the case of the riots, where they kept the courts open for 24 hours, to process everyone in this extremely rapid way. So I think, November, in a sense, is that time where, yeah, there's stasis, but the time itself is not controlled by you, by it's you know, a legal time, if you like, I think, in some ways. Okay, I should ask you some questions. I just asked you a couple of things. I mean, I guess there's a kind of interesting, maybe general point about, you know, I mean, I was talking about some of the concepts from your essays, most of which are published by eFlux, all online, and, you know, really these incredible essays and these incredible ideas. And, you know, at the same time, we're talking about your films and seeing your films. And I guess I've always been curious about the way in which you figure this relation between your films and your writing. I mean, maybe this is a question you don't actually want to answer, and you've probably been asked
No,
it
it's fine.
a lot.
It's fine. Yeah.
But it just seems to me very interesting how you would understand these kind of two things together.
Yeah, I think it's really changed. I mean, at the moment, at first, I really tried to ignore there was, or actively deny there was any relation whatsoever, and I tried to keep it as separate as possible, right? Also because I still think that actually writing and working audiovisually are very different types of activities. But then, you know, as basically everything else, things started collapsing into one another and falling apart, basically. And also, it became very clear to me, or much more clear, even though, you know, I made the switch to digital media, oh, I don't know, before 2000, that basically every image now is text, right? And most of text could be converted somehow into image, and that they are basically sharing one code, if you want, and that that the distinction between text and writing had kind of become artificial, no, like a modernist pretension somehow. And in a way, I would have to acknowledge that those different activities and lots of other activities were sharing this material base. And you know, code is great because so it's no one's mother tongue. I love it. You know, everyone has to learn it. So I really feel, yeah, I think that's incomprehension is the one universal language that people ought to share. So I have no problem with that. So on in that sense, I think that, you know, the writing and the films, also because it's just become um, infrastructurally almost impossible to separate all these things, because usually they all happen at the same time, and some other softwares are running on the computer as well in parallel. So in a way, it's become really a pretension to it would be pretentious, you know, to make people still try to hold up that division. It just doesn't work. Okay, yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, it just on that point. I mean, thinking about the relationship between, you know, your writing and the films. I mean, the new exhibition. I mean, it seems to mark quite a radical departure in some ways in terms of production. The kinds of things you're talking about. You're using a lot of collage, emerging, overlapping. I mean, I think you retain the dimension of the kind of gesture and the interest in this, you know, almost like martial arts, or, you know, these kind of bodies moving. Um, and I guess I just wanted to ask you a little bit about how you conceive of the new work. I mean, I don't know if everyone's seen it yet, but the stuff that's on in the, you know, the other bit of the ICA. Like, you know, what's it? You know, how you sort of conceive of working now, I guess, this kind of really, really recent video art that you've made.
Um, for me, it's a direct consequence of the previous work. I see a lot of links. I mean, very, very literally, I had forgotten I had filmed, or I had used footage of AK-47 bullets in November, no, and then they start popping up again in museum as battlefield because I literally found them. So I mean, there's lots of links between the previous works and the new works. And also, you know, the thing is, I tried probably in each work to somehow reflect the conditions of productions they were made under, and they just changed so quickly, no, but in a way the attempt to include them remains the same throughout the work, and now it just looks very different. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, maybe you should open it up. I forgot my watch, so I have no idea what the time is. But I haven't got my glasses either, so I can't actually see anything. It's going well. Okay, I can see there's a person there.
Hello, thank you for that. I guess we have November, and we also have Freeze. And I wonder if you could both maybe speak briefly about your respective involvements in the art world, especially in relation to a kind of complicity or maybe even a productive contradiction that one can somehow embody through one's agency. I raise this in particular with regards to Nina's framing of the art world as a kind of high capitalist beauty product. So maybe, and I'm interested in both of your opinions, because I think you're both individuals who are somehow or originally operating from without the art world, who have somehow been subsumed into its machinations and presumably experience a degree of dissonance in your daily experience. So I wonder if you could both speak about that.
Would you like to start? No? Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, at least one of the lectures in the show is precisely about that. It's about complicity and how this complicity becomes inescapable somehow when, when being active in this field and trying to at least map out the various forms this complicity is taking, because they are mind-boggling. No, I mean, I don't know whether you've seen the work, but it's about the connections of certain sectors of the art world to the weapons industry, and so on and so on. But of course, the art world is also massively involved with restructuring spaces worldwide, restructuring cities, making them over, transforming them into leisure multiplexes, if you like, with shopping annexes or whatever. So the interesting thing about it is it's massively implicated in embodying the contradictions, and I think the most avant-garde modes of production of contemporary capitalism. This is why it's extremely interesting as a sort of well, I don't have the distance to call it a case study, since I'm one of the guinea pigs myself, no, but something like that. So just being able to witness these contradictions and to see that the mechanisms by which urban space is transformed more or less in the same way in places as different as Vancouver or Delhi or Belgrade, no? By the same, in a way, complicity between contemporary art, real estate, in many cases post-socialist privatization. This is very, very interesting. And, I somehow stopped trying to. I don't think that there is, in a way, a position of innocence with respect to that, right? And I don't know. I mean, it's certainly possible. I just don't know where that would be located and how it would happen and what kind of effects it would have. So at the moment, I'm just fascinated by being a part of the process, being fully aware, not fully, but I mean trying to be as aware as possible of this kind of complicity and mapping it out. That's all I can do at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I once wrote an article a few years ago called "The Art World is Not the World," but I increasingly think that's not true for the reasons that Hito has just outlined in terms of the role that art plays in gentrification and so on. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is a position that is, not complicit in some ways, although I'm very interested in kind of work around politicizing aspects of the art world. So I think thinking about precarious workers' brigade and, the campaigns against internships and also, tracing the money. I mean, just identifying places where the money comes directly from arms or wherever. I think those are sort of politically useful projects, and I think, of course, you as an agent, if we have any agency left, of course, you can make decisions. about where you would work for and who you would not work for, and those kinds of things. But I don't know. I mean, I think we also have to face certain facts. I mean, Peter Osborne, who's a second philosopher in Hito's film, I mean, sometimes talks about the movement from the factory gate being the site of kind of political discourse or a particular image of where discussion might happen, and says, look, in a way, this has all moved to the art world, right, for better or worse. You know, it does remain this place where you can have discussions and engage and make work, which is completely, you know, whatever you want. I mean, just bizarre anything, right? And you can talk about anything in a way.
Yeah, but it is also a part of the factory, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Of a sort of ubiquitous social factory, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
many people work in this field.
Yeah, I mean, it's not some kind of free, liberated space, of course, or, you know, some creative thing. I mean, it's just an attempt to identify that shift. You know, where is, if we want to talk about public discourse, you know, where is a place that that people can talk about anything? It's a difficult question. So yeah, I think we're all doomed, probably. Oh yeah, I was supposed to be looking at people. I think there's like a roving. There's like a roving mic, right? It's over there. So does anyone else want to like ask Hito something? We're so quiet. I can't see anyone. Oh wait, there's Hamid. I mean, person I don't know whose name is in.
Doesn't matter. So, I'll just say it loud. In Adorno's Grey, were you ever tempted to swap the place of philosophers in terms of questions, like asking the question about naked women from Peter Osborne and asking the question about Grey from Nina Power?
That's a good idea. I should do that next time. Yeah.
I promise not to giggle all the way through next time.
Did I really trick you into that? I can't
Yes,
remember.
yes, you did. You said.
I'm sorry.
No, I love it. It's perfect. You said.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what you're going to
Yeah.
talk about. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you recorded
Yeah,
it, so I thought you were going to use it.
probably it's true. Probably I said that, but then I thought it's so perfect. Why should we do it again? No. Yeah.
It's fine. But I'm going to make a film with you in it.
You know, but I mean, obviously, I was referring to Nina's previous book, The One-Dimensional Woman, which is in itself a reference to Marcuse. So I thought, you know, it's not by complete chance that I asked Nina this question.
I'm asking this because then you can blur the boundary here as well.
Yeah.
Peter is more philosophically mysterious and Nina
Thanks.
more like a radical activist figure here.
What? Have you read my philosophy? It's fucking great. No, I think I did have this like discussion. What?
The image that you
Yeah, I know. I sound silly and like I'm a teenage girl. It's fine. But I mean, I think the thing about breasts came out of this discussion I had in my book about autonomous breasts. So this idea that somehow breasts were like separate entities that you could, I don't know, refer to as if they were no longer like attached to a body, but took on the life of their own, and how this features in popular discourse and cultural life. So this is why I was giggling about breasts. Yeah. I'm very mature. I don't know. There's lots of my students here. You should ask them. I'm going to force you to ask Hito questions. Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry, there is someone.
Hello. Just wanted to ask Hito about the place of all the different languages she used, the voice. I'm talking about, you know, you've got German, English, French, especially in November. What's the place of these in-between languages in your work? Is that something you're thinking about, or is that, I don't know if I can say unconscious, but is it something you're really aware of when you use this?
Yes and no. I mean, the best reason for asking people or using, let's say, non-English languages, I prefer doing that because then you can subtitle it, and because sound is always usually so awful in galleries, it's a plus, no? So, yeah, whenever it's possible, I prefer not to use English. Yeah. This is one of the reasons. It's not the main reason. I think, it's kind of, this is how it should be. Yeah. Um, yeah, and the interesting thing, I've made quite a lot of works in languages which I do not understand at all, but I do edit them still. I have translations, but then, it's just the rhythm and the sound of the language. Somehow, because I keep listening to things I don't understanding for months on end, so at the end I just tune into the rhythm of the language and do the editing by that, and usually it works. I think actually that's the ideal form of editing. One should always edit languages one doesn't understand.
Especially Peter Osborne's, right?
That's true.
Okay, it's like, now there's loads of questions. God, people are weird. Right. That person. Yes, you.
Hello. I wonder, could you just say something about the installation that November originally was shown with, and if you think that there's a big difference in the reception of the film in this situation compared to in an installation?
Yeah, I mean, the work that usually is shown in installation form is Adorno's Grey, and of course I think it makes a big difference because it's usually shown on 4 tilted panels, and the form of these tilted panels is repeated by, cut up photographs, actually the photographs that the guy is taking in the movie, which are sort of installed throughout the gallery. There's a timeline to go with it, so there's a lot of historical context about the history of student protests throughout the 20th century and so on and so on. And it's definitely a different experience, but there's no point in telling you that this is how it should be, because this is what it is now. Okay, yeah. So it's of course very different, and I think if you see it like this, you start to wonder why the subtitles are jumping all over the place. It's because they are tied to these 4 different panels. There are 4 different people speaking in the film. There's 4 different timelines, and so on and so on. And of course, all of these are aspects you miss. But I'm very happy to, have. This is a full viewing also of whatever it is now. It's a single screen work.
Okay, there was like maybe the person in the middle, yeah.
Hi, I was just really interested in what you said about a generosity of time in November and a kind of fracturing of time. I'm just thinking about the recent work, in particular the Liquidity Inc. Work, and the way that time plays out in that in the more recent work, and what that might say about what's happened in the intervening 10 years to time.
I have no idea. But at the moment I'm trying to figure out an idea that I call junk time, which is time after time has been trashed. Time as spam, if you like. Time as fragments that are so that are shattered, and that cannot ever be pieced together. There's some indication of this in Liquidity, in a scene which is of course a reference to Walter Benjamin's description to the Angel of History, only that now the Angel of History is an animated GIF, and also the direction of the wind has changed. It's no longer because of climate change and general effects of liquidity, so it's no longer coming from the past and paradise, but it's coming from a future hell, so that the poor creature is sort of thrown into some sort of wind channel experience, no, perpetually being tossed apart. And I think all of that is part of junk time, this fracturing of time into micro loops in a way where duration cannot be sustained because people are exhausted. They cannot afford it any longer. No, they don't have time, or the time they have, it has to be sort of artificially boosted or extended. You have to pretend you're basically present on one online channel while you're trying to catch some sleep, but all the tab browsers are open at the same time. So that's junk time. And I think, especially, because I have been working in moving or in time-based media. But what happens if there's no more time in time-based media? So it's like the rug of time gets pulled out under time-based media. So what is going to happen now? No? And, this is really so much tight. I mean, all of this arises really of almost necessity. So what if you cannot afford, post-production the way it should be done? You just pretend duration by looping GIFs or something. No, it's much cheaper. It's a production mode that's based on exhaustion of resources and basically of everything else as well.
Okay, I think there was a question in the second.
I was really struck in Adorno's grey. There was a shot of the conservationist standing by the patch of grey, and it reminded me of another patch of grey from 1969, which was Lawrence Wiener's in the show at the Kunsthalle in Bern, When Attitude Becomes Form, which was then shown again at the Prada Foundation in Venice last year.
Yeah.
And it just made me feel that we're so prone to reading a period intention out of a work of art. That intention is then we call upon that intention to interpret it, if you see what I mean. And my question is, I guess, do you see your investigations, your film work, as somehow drawing attention to that kind of circularity, or by tracing a journey of an image back through to its origin? Are you somehow, I mean, I guess it's about interpretation.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. I really don't know anything about art, so it had to be brought to my attention, Lawrence Wiener's work, by art historians after that. I was, oh, really? Are you sure? Well, anyhow, so I think that this gesture really tries to also actively grapple with the question of reenactment, or, the revisiting of history, because I think that this work tries to reverse the direction and to just, at a certain moment decide that basically the reenactment will not happen, right? It will be an act of fictionalization or creation, but the time will be reversed. It's not about repeating or restaging or excavating something that has happened, but to, create something completely different in the process.
Okay, I think we've got time for like one or two more questions if anyone else wants to. Yeah.
Hi, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role of the body in your work, because I just noticed watching November, it's like the good guys use their hands instead of the weapons, and then you've got the bare breast in Adorno's Grey, and just going on from what you were saying about the kind of this exhausted time, but it's more that it's kind of our exhausted bodies, maybe within a finite time of our bodies, because obviously time and space is infinite. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that bit.
I don't know. Because I'm just so worried, because this would invite me to, consider the body as some sort of prime site of resistance, which you can always fall back on, but it can also be a traitor. No, the body as not as translator, but as traitor, if you like. So, well, there's lots of bodies, there's lots of some bodies of any bodies. For example, that book or shield, basically, that the person is using in order to break out from a kettle he realizes he didn't really want to break out from. No, that's a body as well. It's about extensions in space, I guess. And this is something which, runs along with this idea of junk time, but I think that this is somehow getting exhausted too, just starting from the very practical question of, I need a body. Anyone needs a body to occupy a square, right? You have to put some extended matter into the square to occupy it. But what do you do if you don't have the time to do it because you've got, to pick up your kid from school or do like 10 different things at the same time? What are you going to do? Are you going to put a styrofoam installation, as an avatar? So I think this multiplication of bodies, but also multiplications of stand-ins, the exhaustion of extension, if you like, the inability to even be able to occupy your own body anymore. That's something which is really fascinating to me. Maybe even more than the question. I don't feel I could. It's not the repository of resistance or anything original. It's one form of matter which is extremely fragile and also vulnerable to getting exhausted by the demands of contemporary capitalism.
Okay, good answer. I don't know if just if there's any last question. Otherwise, I think we're getting booted out because there's a film or something. So I guess do you want to thank stuff?
Thank you, Nina. Thanks a lot, Nina. Thank you so much.